Yeah, I don't want you to, this, part of what we're doing here, this is part of the evolution of this training. And obviously this side of it can evolve faster than that side of it. So not everything that you might see up on the screen is going to go page for page. Yeah.
Nope.
Don't let that throw you though. I honestly, I want your attention up here more than I do in the book. I'm gonna kick off again. All right. Okay.
Go ahead.
So we're back on the quick reference data. We aren't gonna. I'm not gonna beat this horse to death, if you will. But does anybody have a question about? Does anybody have a question about anything that we've discussed so far on the QRD, or any question about the coil material or constructions, or anything along that variety that you? Yes.
On your QRDs, how does that relate to if you've got the thin-tube microchannel combination? I mean, is that information, is that going to be valid on those type of situations?
When you have a fin and tube condenser against a microchannel evaporator, it will be valid if you are talking about a matchup that is current. And I think I have an idea of where you're driving with that.
To replace it for us.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So what he's asking about is a situation where you have an existing high side condenser. All right. Maybe you've got a single stage AC or a heat pump or whatever the case may be that was 2008, 2009, something like that. Something that was part of a construction and a matchup before, microchannel began to really saturate, if you will, in terms of the matchup. And the indoor coil, something happens with the indoor coil. It springs a leak, whatever the case may be. And now what's happening is you're taking that original fin and tube condenser and that fin and tube evaporator, and that copper fin and tube evaporator comes out and a microchannel coil takes its place. Now what? In terms of the numbers. In some instances, you can then compensate by making sure you've got the correct metering device type. The easiest pitfall to find yourself in a situation like that is when it comes to the charge levels. That type of situation is not as easy, it's not as uniform as saying, okay, now that you've got this single stage 4-ton 13-SEER heat pump from 2008 and that indoor coil has been replaced and gone to microchannel, you go to this information and that system's going to perform the way that it did prior to the coil changeout. It's not uncommon for us to recommend, and we did a bulletin on it, we did a tech bulletin, but in that tech bulletin we talk about things, the terminology that they use is legacy systems. What in the heck are you talking about in terms of legacy systems? What we mean by that is, often when you have a pre-existing condenser, designed, built, performance data, everything was based off of it prior to when microchannel and those matchups began to hit with more frequency, we will not recommend that replacement coil become microchannel, that you keep that. You take a copper fin and tube out, you go back in place with a copper fin and tube. We saw this, we saw this down the road in the future, if you will. I probably didn't hit on it as well as I should have. I want to back up real quick, because that's a great question. That's a great question. And What we did in response to being, and also probably what you may be driving from is guys would say, hey, all right, I had copper fin and tube inside now. My copper fin and tube, you know, I sprung a leak inside. We have situations where the guy on the other end is saying, I don't want to go back to another copper fin and tube because I don't want to turn right around and be dealing with a leak on this thing again anytime soon. What we did in response to that, I didn't hit on well enough on this slide, so I'm backing up to it now. But originally in replacement coils, there were only very select models where we did the anteater alloy or basically went to the Levada process on the coil. That went across the board very, very quickly. All of the replacements, if we say to you, all right, you're looking at a matchup here right now where honestly it's going to be better off performance-wise to not try to shortchange that condenser on charge, to be able to keep it like for like. So rather than going to a microchannel, we're going to recommend you go back into a copper fin and tube replacement. Those have the anteater alloy additive on them now, because we did not want that trepidation of guys saying, hey, you know, I don't want my only option to be a coil that I could foresee is going to spring a leak again, but I also am not interested in going into a microchannel where to compensate to try to keep the system online and running, I now need to radically alter my refrigerant charge to a level that compromises its performance. Does that make sense? Here's the sticky point of that. What's the break point? By age, if you will. What's that break point? And if I had to give you a year, if I had to throw a number out there to you, I would have to recommend 2008. If you've got a 2008 going backwards and you've got a copper fin and tube condenser outside, and now you're looking at having to replace that indoor coil, and the first option that comes up is a microchannel replacement, pump the brakes for a second and let's look at doing a fin and tube replacement inside rather than immediately going to microchannel.
The problem we run into with that in the field is a lot of times when the anteater coils or a lot of coil you're talking about, the dimensions change. So downflow applications, now I got to install a furnace, especially if someone's plugging their parts in later.
I will not try to tell you that process did not have its pitfalls. Yes.
So can I use, so say 2008, I'm on that bubble there. Now I want to use a microchannel coil because I got the dimension that's going to fit in a downflow application, say on a gas furnace, two-stage 80% gas furnace.
Okay.
And I can go to a microchannel, and they're recommending it. You know, our local supplier is recommending a microchannel. What do I do to get the charge right?
Probably one of the first things right off the bat that you're more than likely going to need to anticipate is there's a high likelihood that you're probably looking at having to go to a TXV, because that's going to help. The TXV is going to help regulate your superheat output on the coil. When it comes to the charge aspect of it, when that happens, you aren't going to just be able to solely rely on a weight to get you that close. That's going to become that opportunity where you're going to be looking to charge by subcooling, by looking to see what your superheat is, so you can judge what the performance of the TXV is doing in relation to superheat output on the evaporator, and what your split is across the evaporator. And in kind of another way to put that, in a situation like that, that's when you're going to go old school. That's when you're going to go old school. And you aren't going to necessarily be able to just be like, okay, I can go X and X for weight, put that in, and I should be right there ready to rock and roll. That's going to be more of a time to back up and use the old kind of tried and true.
Yeah, because it's tricky, because sometimes the charger will so say I'm charged at a 12-degree subcool, and everything seems to be okay, and I ran the system for 2 hours and monitored it, went to lunch, come back, and then the customer calls that evening or the next day, and this thing's getting on high head pressure because it's overcharged.
And is that like in a cooling mode application on a heat pump?
Cooling mode, heat pump. And I've had more than one situation like that, where that's occurred, and you know, I mean, I've spent multiple hours sitting watching a charge, because you know they can fluctuate, and sometimes they can be a little volatile.
Right.
And then, you know, you go 24 hours, and then it seems like it's like a pound or two overcharged.
Okay. So the other thing too, and again, this is going to be a little bit trickier because you guys won't have direct access to the bulletins in the same way that the guys at 2J would. I mean, everybody in the room, I don't mean to point you out or make you feel like somehow you're more deserving than anybody else. Situations like that you're running into, I want to see the bulletin number right off the top of my head now escapes me, and I apologize for that. But one of the other bulletins that we did was basically target superheat subcooling levels on certain types of system configurations. I would want you to be able to get your hands on that bulletin because it's got tables in there that information was driven off of that kind of weird little transition point when microchannel first started to happen, and guys were putting them up against heat pump systems in particular, and they were struggling to get charge levels correct. I would want you to be able to get your hands on that bulletin so you could have those tables. And then my other recommendation is going to be, obviously you're going to be looking to kind of charge off of a more traditional manner in terms of subcooling. You're more than likely going to be needing to go to a TXV setup as far as the indoor metering device. What else? TXV, the chart or the table in the bulletins. And the coil replacement guide. That's what it was. The coil replacement guide. And the coil replacement guide. That is not private protected information. I'm going to come back to the QRD here, I promise. Because I know you guys are loving that. You guys are like, woo! I'm going to get me some more of that QRD. But it's important. I'll do it this way. This one, man, I'm glad you asked that question. That's a solid question. That's a solid question. You get a free cup of coffee. If I had a door prize, you would have just won. Okay, this guy right here. This is on the library, so it's available. You can pull that up at any time. Another instance that probably has been happening. So I want you guys to understand something, because at any given moment, somebody at 2J, they're taking a phone call on a boiler, and then they've got a guy standing in front of them he's got something that he's looking for on a gas furnace. Those guys have so much in the air that they are juggling at any given moment. You cannot just be like, oh, dude, you gave me an O2M and they're telling me I need an O2HS. You cannot take that kind of approach to it, if you will. Nobody's looking to send you out the door with, you know, with anything incorrect, if you will. You have to give them time to process. But the other thing too is this. If you're going to need to make that change, I want you to go to the coil replacement guy and I want you to verify that what you got inside and what your option is as far as a microchannel or an HS coil is, and make sure that what you would end up going to in that replacement coil is the correct one. And the reason why I say that is I've seen instances where you'll say, okay, all right, I had a coil that sprung a leak, I replaced that coil and I went into a replica coil M. And it wasn't the same dimension, so I had to do a whole bunch of refabrication. I wasn't too happy about that. And then you start having issues with being able to get the thing charged correctly. So now the frustration is starting to build for you. And then you make a phone call. And you get on the phone with a guy like me, and I end up telling you, you know what, you should have never done the microchannel as the replacement to begin with. That's not anybody's fault at 2J Supply if that happens. That is not anybody's fault at 2J Supply, because their computers, what their system drives up for them is data that we have to input on our end. When they put in that information, what's generating back to them is not always going to 100% of the time foolproof end up with this kind of information on the coil replacement guide.
The biggest problem that we've had has been the dimensions of the coil and the dimensions of where the line sets come out when we give them, because we have that, and we go over that. I mean, we have, every guy has a book at the counter specifically for that, separate than every other book, so that we can flip through it easily, and we'll give them the coil that it specifies, and then they'll get it out to the job site and they'll unbox it, and then the lines are way up here, where they're 6 inches above the end of the coil, and they can't. That's been the biggest problem.
And that's the recommended coil that they're telling us.
No, we ran into that.
See, it's not our fault.
But
Yeah.
the HRI will supersede that. Some of your computers will have it, but we ran into an instance where I wanted to match a particular coil with the system. And we went into, and I told them what I read up, it should match and give me what I need. It didn't show in their computer that it was a matched coil until we went into HRI, popped in the stuff, and then it matched it. So, you know, it actually went a step further to match that coil as opposed to what they had in the system. It was a match, but it wasn't, it was fairly new, so it wasn't in there yet. So what I'm saying is there's another step you can take through that AHRI site that they taught me that we have access to, and matched it up, because I was convinced it should match the way it was in the, you know, but it didn't show in their computer. Said no, it doesn't show that's a match. I said, well, what about the AHRI? I have to have that printed out anyhow, so let's go in there and look, and it did match. So there is another step.
And I would agree with you there. And that the directory is definitely, and I kind of hit on that in a little bit here. The directory is another resource. The directory is the reality is that directory is probably not nearly as popular as what it could be, because the intuitive user interface of the HRI directory is poor, in my opinion. The HRI directory provides you with a lot of options for the filtration of the information you're looking for, and a lot of guys will tell me that they get better results by giving it less information than more information.
That's what I was taught.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they even told me, is less is better.
Yeah.
You put in your basic information, and it doesn't garble it with a lot of the information you don't need.
Yeah.
Put in basically what you're looking at, and it worked, because we walked through it on the phone and matched it up. But
here's a great example of your situation. Here's a great example of what I would want to encourage you to do, because I've done it the longhand version, if you will, a number of times now at this point. So when you are faced with a situation like that, on an older fin-in tube condenser, and let's say you're at that break point, you're like around that 2008 mark, and you've got a warrant, and it's warranty too, all right? So that's another kicker on there. You certainly want to be able to provide the warranty that you sell for the equipment that you install, right? So what I would want to see you all do is, man, solid question, because here's where the library is going to pay dividends. So you're going to come into this document, all right? You are going to locate and match that current indoor model that you have. That's the affected coil. This is what's going to be coming out, if you will, all right? Let me go down. I'm going to go down to some.
All right.
I'm going to go down to some air handler options here. Okay. So here's a B5. Here's a B5 4-ton as an example right here, and